A lot of teams say they want better CI CD. What they usually mean is they want fewer weird failures, less shared state nonsense, less tribal knowledge, and way less time wasted fighting the delivery system itself. Because the problem is not just that Jenkins is old. The problem is when your pipelines are noisy, fragile, hard to reuse, hard to observe, and tightly coupled to a bunch of infrastructure decisions developers should not have to think about. And when you finally fix the problem, you get a different problem. Success. Because once delivery gets fast and easy, people start using it for everything: bots, maintenance changes, dependency bumps, mass rollouts, and now the real question becomes, how do you keep the system smooth when everybody finally trusts it? Hey, I'm Brian. I work in DevOps and SRE, and I run Teller's Tech. Ship It Weekly is where I filter the noise and focus on what actually matters when you are the one running infrastructure and owning reliability. Most weeks, it's a quick news recap. In between those, I do interview episodes with people who have actually built things, migrated real systems, and learned what works the hard way. Today is one of those conversations. I'm joined by Stephane Moser from Pipedrive. He helped lead a big move from Jenkins to GitHub Actions, built a self-hosted runner platform on Kubernetes, moved delivery towards GitOps with Argo CD, and helped roll that model out across a large internal estate with hundreds of services. And what I like about this one is it's not just tool talk. We get into why Jenkins had become painful, from groovy fiction to noisy neighbor problems on shared VMs, why GitHub Actions ended up fitting better, how reusable workflows and custom actions helped, why they chose Argo CD over other deployment options, and how they had to build better internal observability because GitHub alone was not enough at their scale. We also talk about the migration strategy, which honestly is one of the best parts: dogfooding first, migrating in batches, using internal teams as the first proving ground, letting the process get polished before pushing it wider, and building something self-service enough that teams eventually started migrating on their own. And then there is the mobile story, which is its own thing: Mac minis, messy runner drift, different tool chains, and the surprisingly practical path they landed on after testing a few different options for stabilizing mobile CI. If you care about CI/CD architecture, platform engineering, GitHub Actions at scale, or how to do a migration like this without setting your org on fire, this one is worth your time. All right, let's jump in. Today, I'm joined by Stephane Moser from Pipedrive. He helped lead a big move from Jenkins to GitHub Actions and built a self-hosted runner platform on Kubernetes, plus a GitOps CD flow with Argo CD. And we're going to talk about what worked, what broke, and what's worth copying. Stephane, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this adventure. Basically, it's not the first time I'm talking about this. I already had a meetup, a session that was recorded on YouTube, 2 blog posts, and basically just sharing again these adventures. But now little sparkling, because something already after 1 year already changed. So I have more stuff to add to this blog posts and meetup that we had.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn more. So starting off, can you give me a thesis? Like, why did Jenkins stop working for you, and what were you trying to optimize with this new system?
So basically, the first problem that we had with Jenkins is Jenkins, besides being the pipelines being written in Groovy, that was the first problem. In Pipedrive, we are mainly working with TypeScript and Go. Groovy was really not very native for us, so it was a barrier for the DevOps teams that we had at that time, plus the engineers trying to writing something. That was the first issue. The second issue was basically the setup. So we had VMs, and that VMs were not isolated. So that's meaning if a big pipeline lands in one VM and we had other pipelines like to build the Docker containers, then we had the issue into the noisy neighborhood. So basically, we get a starvation of the resource. So it's really not predictable. We tried to improve that. So we had a crazy idea first to build an internal CI engine. So that was really the most crazy thing we did. So basically, we copy the idea of YAML from GitLab CI. We build the engine and then start to work on that. But then we had another issues. People needs to learn a new syntax. And
Hmm.
after GitHub launch GitHub Actions, people starting to using, some developers starting to using in their repositories. And then we were thinking, why not experimenting? And the first idea was basically, beside Jenkins, we had another product was CodeShip that was to do the pull request validation. So every time the pull request is open, we had typical linting test work. So basically linting the building the um, code, linting the code, and doing the unit tests. They were running in the code chip, and I can tell it was worse that Jenkins because every project was individual. So imagine if I had to change or to share something, it's very difficult. So we had idea. Well, let's try with GitHub Actions, and basically I team up with a colleague, Gregor, and basically was the idea that let's replace CodeShip with GitHub Actions. Let's see what happens. And that was really the kickoff. So we get a green card to explore the idea. So the first thing was thinking that is okay. I need to run this somewhere, probably probably GitHub. Even we had a free package will not be enough. So let's go to find solutions for self-hosting. We found, after some ideas, we found a community project that is Arc, Actions Run Controller. At this moment, it's already belonging to or maintained by GitHub, but at that time was really purely community based. One thing that it was very important for us, or was very convenient for us, it was a Kubernetes controller. So we spent the last years working with Kubernetes. We are understanding the Kubernetes API, the CRDs, how to talk with in the Kubernetes way. So it was more easy to work with that. So we define resource, get runners running, fine. One thing that is also awesome, we can grab a pre-built image and then pack and put that customization that you want. So basically, developer needs HGK, IK, or different tooling. Just put it inside of that custom image, and then we ship it. It was even for easy. Then we already know how to restrict and monitoring Kubernetes in production. Just apply the same idea in the CI environment. So basically, I did a thing that is normally not normal standard. So basically, I didn't set the requests to be the smallest possible or the most necessary. No, I just was brute force. So I say, for example, set the request and the limits to be almost the same so that I could have one thing that is predictability in the runner so that every time a developer get a runner, get always the same CPU and memory. So that's avoid the problem of noisy neighborhoods. Then we had already ideas we already know how to see and control the resource in Kubernetes. So apply the same metrics. So basically, we bring back the observability tools that we had in production to the CI cluster. But then we also did want to be more straightforward in the process to maintain the clusters. Basically, instead of building the cluster from scratch, we use EKS to be more easy.
Hmm.
And then we want to have scalability in terms of the nodes. We decide then to go to the new project at that time was Carpenter. So basically the magic way of AWS to spawn nodes
Hmm.
faster that cluster auto scaling. So basically, then we get this solution. So a controller that was listing the GitHub app books to spawn jobs, spawn when it is necessary, creates a new pod that represents a runner. If that runner doesn't have a space, the carpenter then creates a new node. And that was really bring the flexibility saying, okay, I just need to set the max number of pods or runners and the ecosystem or the cluster scale up and scale down when necessary. And this was really basically the why we moved to Jenkins and first steps. We then basically did the migration of CodeShip to GitHub Actions. At that time, also was released the reusable workflow. So that means we are able to create a workflow and spread that workflow to all the repositories. So reducing the repetition that we had and the manual configuration we had with Jenkins, with the CodeShip. And basically, after we drop out the CodeShip, it was a time that we have the opportunity to revamp CI/CD. So we bring a group of engineers, I think 4 engineers plus um, a developer experience product manager. So basically, we had a product manager dedicated for developer experience. And then
Mhm.
we decided to revamp the CI/CD, and they basically the idea is that to put some kind of competition in terms of tooling. So I remember that the first contender was basically GitHub Actions in terms of CI, but then also we bring Argo workflows and Tecton because were two projects that I was curious about using. And in terms of deploying, we're thinking Argo CD plus Flux. We even tried with Spinnaker, but it was so messy to spin up
Mm.
that system that we just drop it. And how we choose. So basically, first was readability or feasibility or the easiness to create the workflows and the specific customizations. So, and that is really shine for us, the GitHub Actions. Basically, people complain about the actions, but it's really the fact that the actions are written in JavaScript and then we are using TypeScript. So it's natural to create custom logic with TypeScript. Even then, we can go to creating composite actions with some more for some batch scripts. We just use that language to create the customization. And then it was really easy to pack up. So basically we create an action, we have a package, like a package, and then we can put it a block that we can put in different place. And then the other point was basically about how we can expose or show the workflows to the developers. And
Mm.
the idea is that the less clicks the developer does
Mhm.
find logs, the better. And
Mhm.
that, of course, makes the GitHub Action to be a big content. So the fact that the workflows was next to the repository, the execution was next to the repository. The developer didn't need to switch between platforms to see was really a big plus.
Yeah.
And that's really the reason why we went to GitHub Actions. Even at some point after this migration, what we had, it's basically a mono rep of GitHub Actions. And I think we have 50 or 60 GitHub Actions. So basically, we just build our actions and even is our mono rep of all the code base that we want to reuse in the organization. In terms of development, of deployment, one thing that we want to make clear is that we want to avoid push code. So one of the issues that we had always is that with Jenkins and this push idea is that fact that I need to have a runner in the cluster to push code. That means that I need to give the Kubernetes credentials to a runner to be able to write stuff. And that means that in some way I can try to capture that runner and do malicious stuff. So let's do the reverse. So that is that the cluster is really in isolation and we get what we have. It's someone inside that check something that it's already trusted and use it to apply change in the cluster. And that is really why you want to go to GitOps.
Mhm.
And of course, in GitOps, we have two tools to choose, Argo CD or Flags.
Yeah.
And in that case, was basically one of the reasons. Basically, Argo CD have a good add or have a good UI comparing with Flux at that time. It was like 2, 3 years ago. So that was really the big reason that we pick up with Argo CD instead of Flux for the UI, and then we had already a way to show to developers what it's happened in more easy way because again, the idea is that it's easy for developers to visualize. Doesn't mean that I allow them to change manifest with Argo CD.
Yeah.
No, what I allowing is to basically scope inside of the application, saying, okay, this is your application.
Hmm.
See your status. You can go see the status of your resource. You can see the logs if you need it. You can see if the pod it's restarting or not. And really, um, we added that idea to yeah, you can show. Yeah, after that idea, I think that picking up the GitHub Actions took me like 2 days to create MVP of the deployment flow. Basically, because I was reusing everything that I already did it in the code chip migration, and we decided to have that MVP and then see what are the gaps. So one thing that I forgot to mention is that initially in the first step or first iteration that we had with migrating to code chip, we had a problem, a lack of observability, observability in terms of actions. GitHub at that time didn't provide any statistics about the actions. So if you want to know how long was the runner, you have any idea. You can just see at the repository and it was not good enough. Not especially in our organization that we already have. At that time we had like 700 service. We have architecture of microservice
Hmm.
plus libraries. It was impossible to track at repository level. So what we did is basically we create a service that lists these events and then starting putting everything inside of a database so that could build a source that we can then do queries and then find what are the performance of the workflow. Because at some point, a manager, a director, or even CTO comes to us. It says, "What is the failure rate of these workflows? What are the workflows that are taking, or in this
Yeah.
case, what are the deployment flows that are taking more time? What are the steps that we need to optimize?" And then basically, this is really our gut feeling that we need that information, and we are storing that information. And until now, we're still using that service to track, even now to tracking more billing information, but it's really the source of truth. Okay, that was the phase one and phase two. Phase three or F, it's basically making the product ready for the consumption. And
Hmm.
one thing that we discovered that we lack, it's basically again organization wide of the visibility. GitHub Action, it's great to see your workflows, to see the organization. It's bad because we don't have anything. So we create a service that is basically a registration service plus a UI that we have in our back office. So basically, we have a UI in our back office that shows all the deployments, but they need to have some source. And basically, we create a service that consume events that we are producing in our workflows, and after consuming these events, can do the mapping of what it's app. And basically, we have basically our own interpretation of the events of GitHub Actions because they have a different interpretation of what is a deployment, what is a deploy, what is a region, and then basically we add that internal logic or that internal understanding what is build, test, unit test, functional test, end-to-end test, deploy to a region, deploy to a deployment at whole scale, and we have that understanding inside of a service. And basically, this was initial the service that was consuming everything to create of observability of what we need to do or what we have in terms of deployments to production. And after that, we have after that having that UI, we're more confident to go. Now go the question: how you do this kind of release? 700 service. I think we have 5 teams or 10 teams at that time. It was a really a big migration. So how you start migrations? I think like like any product should migrate or should be released. You first try it yourself. So basically, And we decide to migrate our own service. So my team doesn't only produce CI/CD. We have a couple of service that supports the deployment flows and support the developer experience. So, for example, we had one service that creates and do all the life cycle of remote dev environments. So basically, we have remote dev environments that developers can use. That it's a replica of production, and then we have a system that creates that. So, for example, this is one of these servers that we need to migrate, and the idea is really basically like this. So I have scripts, I have workflow, I have documentation to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I deliver to my teammate so that my teammate can migrate. These bring two good things. First, we test our process to someone that doesn't know about the process. And second, we allow to share knowledge. So basically, knowledge that was restricted to that 5 people that create systems starting to be spread to the team because I'm sharing that knowledge by forcing the people to doing the migration. And basically, it was basic this alpha grouping. Then we had a different team. So basically, it was a platform team that it's more experience that the normal developers around stuff with Kubernetes and the deployment process, and they have more of the out of the box or out of the standard service. Then we go to them and say, okay, we have this Polish workflow. Let's now teach you, do a session, and then allow them to migrate. And then it was basically like the open beta of the system of the migration. Again, the idea was to make everything more polished, more clear for the users. After they give us our feedback and then we improve the workflows, define, we start doing to think how we do all the rollout. In this case, we pick up the, um, the prioritization that SRE team define for the service. So basically, SRE define tiers. So tier 1 is a service that's very critical. Tier 2, it's more or less, and then tier 3 is less critical. So we decide, okay, let's split these in batch. Let's go for by team, starting with tier 3. Then they can move to tier 2, and then tier 1, and that was the idea. And then the plan was basically split it in batch and assign a DevOps engineer to each batch, not to do the migration, but to be the assistant. So basically, the person does the introduction of the new UI, the new workflow, and then this is the the GitHub Actions role that we have to do your migration and also to make them. So basically, if I have one person that's responsible to achieve a goal of migrate X number of service until the end of the month, it will keep the momentum in the team. And then we starting doing that. So team by team, we starting moving. We have a schedule. We have a limit number of engineers. So basically, we have a queue.
Mm-hmm.
Until some moments, we had guys from the middle of the queue or the end of the queue saying, okay, I already saw the other guys doing migration. I think I can do it alone. Okay, just check the recording that we had. Try yourself with it. Yeah, and they decide to try alone and starting doing migration alone. So basically, the system was already so well oiled and everything was moving smoothly. They were able to migrate alone, and that's really, I think, the real success story of doing these migrations by batch, doing your dog fooding and all this thing in a way that making everything automatically or with less human intervention to allow the people using. And then you also can think this is really the idea of the baby platform engineering, making everything a self-service.
Yeah.
When you have a product that's already usable for a normal product engineer that doesn't need to have the context of the CI/CD and how to deploy to Kubernetes, it's a service that he can use and can work and can do
Mm-hmm.
his work autonomously. And yeah, that's then after 5 months, I think we migrate everything. Yes, we found what we get as issues is basically our success starting break things. So
Okay.
the process was so smoothly, the deployment flow was so good, that then we starting the introduction of bots to create deployment for the maintenance tasks. So basically, SRE team develop a service to create pull requests to adjust the resource usage in production and then automatically deploy that to production. So basically create a pull request with new sets of resource, and this pull request is already pre-approved. So move by all the normal pipeline flow and goes to production. Then we have Dependabot creating pull requests for dependencies. And in some case, the developers were already confident enough in the unit test they have, in the functional test they have, they allow that publications or updates of dependencies to go without any approval from a human. So we had then a situation that we have multiple deployments happen and then was struggling or doing impact in our system. Even we can grow. Then we had some bottlenecks. At that point, we decide to improve that service that was the deployment register to have a queue. So the idea is that you then have a way that you, when you start the deployment, you send event, I have a deployment, and then what happens is that the deployment register that deployment and put in the queue. Evaluate the queue size. So basically, we define that we have the number of 50 deployments per available in parallel. And also, we do a tricky thing that is we only allow 10% of that queue to be used by bots. So basically, we always want to have some kind of free space for the humans to develop features to ship. And basically that's the idea. And so we have a queue with all the idea to put a margin for human, and then if everything's it's okay, then we rerun the workflow that allows to execute everything. And yeah, it was basically that thing that we had to improve. Also, one of the bottlenecks that we had was we had issues with how we commit to environment state. So basically, was one of our really bottlenecks is when you have multiple deployments, you need to be only can commit one at a time the deployment. So basically, we had a strategy that we create one commit per region. So we have a pile of commits to push to that uh, Git environment set repository. And that was really a bottleneck. Fortunately, we were not very clever at that time to create the queue for that specific step. And then we had to re-engineering all the process because we had the issue that we didn't do like a FIFO. So basically, we did implement a hot robin, and that means that some guys was very unlucky that it was the first one to arrive and was not the first one to get their stuff deployed. Yeah, this is really the story that we have. What was missing at that time was in the presentation and blog post was really the migration to the mobile
Hmm.
team. I don't know if you want to go to already to that story. It's a new story that I have, or
Yeah,
you
sure.
want to have any other questions?
Let's actually get to the mobile story in a second. So, going back over your CI/CD process, I'm curious. First off, are you worried about the GitHub change to private self-hosted runners? They're changing the pricing model, so I guess they're going to charge for self-hosted as well now. Is that going to change your implementation at all? Or?
That's the problem. I can think that if they starting to charge that, then I need to start to thinking. If they start charging like that, then I need to really be picky in their SLAs.
Mhm.
So how they can charge me a fee for the control plane when their control plane it's not really 99 or doesn't
Yeah.
meet the SLAs.
It certainly
So
hasn't been lately, that's for sure.
that is really the thing. Even we don't even we get that we more or less exclude that from our metrics of deployment failures. I already starting to think, already seeing some page that shows the SLA in the last couple of months, and then I'm starting to thinking, if you
Mm,
charge me for this, I need to have a better SLA. I cannot stop
yeah.
working, and then for the size of what we have, it's basically or I need to find a different CI tooling and going to that path, or even can go more crazy. Don't forget that, okay, we are a special case, or not, probably not a normal case. That is, we are already in enterprise level,
Hmm.
and we have GitHub hosted enterprise server. So basically,
Mm,
you can bring your service. And if this is starting to be expensive, probably that's the thing I need to do. It's
yeah.
I bring down and then try to be less dependent of the reliability of the cloud version, and then be my concern. And then I can then point
Hmm.
myself, yeah, your GitHub is down because myself and not because of some change in the cloud version. But yeah, it will be really a concern. And if they force us, it's basically now I will go to my legal team and then check the SLA, and let's see if they don't apply the SLA. They starting to get some notice from our legal team to get a chargeback or something.
So also you had mentioned that's a fair statement for sure. You had mentioned looking at Flux originally and then going with Argo. Are you using anything like Crossplane with Argo yet or no?
No, so basically, the fact that we don't use crossplay is basically because it's not in our domain of work.
Okay.
From what I understand, really the idea is that crossplay it's a good way to provision a resource using Kubernetes as a native language. I try to understand from Victor Varsek, from that's working with Crossplane, the difference between Terraform and Crossplane, and that's really the reason that we didn't go deep in Crossplane, because the main player of Terraform and provision infrastructure is the infrastructure team, not the engineering excellence department. Basically, we are the middle layer. Imagine this like a lasagna or a burger. Basically, the team it's the lowest band, and I am the lettuce. And then we have
Hmm.
even up on me, we have the burger, and then we have the tomato, and they have the other band. So basically, we have these layers, and I'm in that layer that I consume service from infrastructure team, and then I deliver service to the platform team and to the developers. So that's the reason that we don't look for cross-plane. That's the thing that I would like to experiment, but then I need to really have a good case of why ditch a Terraform to use cross-plane.
Yeah. It's more, I guess, if you want the infrastructure definitions closer to the actual service, right? So if you want that all defined together. And there's pros and cons for both ways, I would say, honestly. Even in our organization, we kind of or I've worked in organizations where we've done both.
Yeah, even listen what Victor said about the idea of cross-plane and how to use cross-plane. And the idea, for example, is one of the examples that I can tell, or I can get a model in Terraform that's get me a Postgres DB from Motherblast. But probably if I want to talk with a developer wants to have the minimal settings to change. So
Hmm.
basically, I think that with crossplane you can abstract that with their internal resource and say, okay, define this YAML manifest or that YAML resource, or sorry, that CRD in YAML, and then the controls and everything will set up everything for you. So at this moment, we don't add this kind of need in terms of organization to have exposed so much the infrastructure to the developers, and that's real. Without need, I don't have a way to force attack to be used, because
Oh, that's fair.
it's always a balance. Yes, it's cool, but I need to really it makes sense
No, for
to
sure.
to the case.
So tell me about the new mobile deployments. How is that going, and
Yeah.
how
So
did you set
basically,
that up? Yeah.
the mobile team was using Jenkins, but even with more strange setup. So basically, they had a farm of Mac Minis, and they basically we connect with the Jenkins controller master,
Hmm.
and they were using that. So basically, they were using Groovy, pure Groovy in their Jenkins pipelines, plus with Fastlane for the iOS team. The Android team will use a different tooling, and then was really that massive because part of the team needs to be operations to understand to upgrade the nodes, to fix issues. And also, again, the same issue of isolation when we had cases that the nodes were not very identical, and a job was, if lands in one machine was passing, if lands in the other machine it was failing, or
Mm.
leftovers between artifacts between was screwing up with node versions, Ruby versions, and was really a mess. So lack of predictability. And then that was really the idea. We need to move to GitHub Actions, but plus also find a way to make their compute power or compute resource be very stable,
Mhm.
using having the same identity that we had in the CI/CD for the microservice, so that was immutable, independent, and isolated. And at that point, it was really a surprise for me, the end solution, but basically was this case. So I went to a research that basically I put 4 cases on top of the table. First, using VMs inside of Mac. So basically, a product from Circle CI, Circles or Cirrus CI. So basically, a company that's already providing GitHub Action runners
Mhm.
for Macs and have the system to work. And basically, it's on top of the one tooling at its start. And basically, it's a nice tooling to spawn VMs inside of Mac. Then the idea, okay, let's try use Next for some independence in isolation. And the other idea was basically also to use AWS. So why not spawn Macs in AWS and use it as a GitHub handlers? And at last I was thinking, I need at least think in the way of outsourcing this to a company, in this case GitHub Actions, but I could outsourcing to other GitHub Actions providers, or first to GitHub itself and then to other providers, because you can see that Blacksmith and other, I think Depot are providers of GitHub Action kernels that you can offload and don't depend of GitHub to have the best performance in your machines. And basically, it was really a pure scientific research. I have 4 hypotheses. I have 1 month to test it, and I set like 1 week for each process and then try to go. And this is really the first. It was in summer of last year, and also that culminate in the appearance of the AI native mindset. So in this experimental research, after I collide with issues with tooling, I found that I had to use Start to create VMs. So the first hypothesis, and then I would decide, well, if I try to create a controller, like I have the idea or the already the use case that to have a control for Kubernetes to runs. So why I don't have a action runner controller for that? And that was really the idea. I starting to think I did a POC with shell script because it was a very easy commands. But then I decided, okay, I have a nice shell script. Let me do a really nice MVP. And then I did my first specification development project. So basically, I used this idea. I then decided to define my specifications in a markdown file, what I want, what were the toolings, what are the constraints, and then use, in this case, was already still using GitHub Copilot and say, I have this idea in this file. Let's make a plan. And starting elaborating the plan, creating the plan. And then the process was really that way that after I have the plan, we need to have to-do lists or to-dos for each point. And then basically I force the copilot to go for each to-do or each step, do the implementation, I review it. Okay, it's fine. Let's move to the next one. Fine. And then also ask to do a summary of each implementation. So basically to have a history of what I did. Just important for me, but also too important to share with the team all this process. And then after like 1 day and a half, I got a control. So basically, I had a Mac Mini in my desk. I put the control there, and it was spawning and doing the life cycle
Mm.
of the VM. So basically, a workflow. It's my runner, execute it niche, drop, tear down the VM, start a new one, register it against GitHub, like normal flow. And I was say,
Mhm.
yeah, nice. I just need to make some improvements. Then I moved to the next AI. In this case, also it was Copilot, helped me a lot. how to build the recipes with Nix, but it fails tremendously just because of the way Xcode works. It was very annoying to work. And then I had the issue of how to distribute Xcode. At that time, I was running out of time. AWS was not really an option to investigate. And then I started doing some calculations about cost if I use GitHub
Hmm.
as a provider of Redis. And surprise, it was cheap
Well,
for our use case. So it was basically a matter of us after spending 3 or 4 months collecting metrics in Jenkins, I say, yeah, we can use it. And basically, it was really the idea. I said, okay, this is the amount of money, and comparing the working hours that it's necessary for engineer to fix this,
Mhm.
it's a good balance. And then after I convinced my director that it really makes sense in terms of financial terms, he approved, and then we move. And then we moved to migration. And that this migration was I did with the junior. The first thing that we did with this migration was really sit down with the developers, and I asked annoying tasks to my junior. In this case, it was still eternity. Sorry, but it was really important to that. I asked him go for each Jenkins pipeline they have and start doing a flowchart. So
Hmm.
basically, we add a flowchart for each Jenkins pipeline with steps, and the steps in the way that what is supposed to do and what are the commands that are executed. And then I sit down with each team from Android and iOS, and then let's go forward for each step. And then try to understand, does this make sense? This flow.
Mhm.
I don't care about what is the command that's executed. Does this step make sense? Does this test make sense? Does this fork in the logic make sense? And then we also understand some good things, that is some workflows or some Jenkins jobs that we had was already redundant. We could refactor the input and combine in one single pipeline. And that was really the idea. And then that was the second time we used the AI to speed up. And this time I already added the session of agentic coding with my engineering department. So basically, the engineering excellence create agentic sessions to teach us how to use AI tools in a more agentic way. So not to autocomplete features, but to give context, to give a goal, and then have this AI as a really a partner to execute. And then at this time already we was using Cloud Code. And then, okay, let's bring these flow charts, convert to something that is more digestible by AI. So I was able to export as a CSV file, and then tell, okay, this is our CSV files, contains flowcharts of our workflows. Let's build GitHub Action workflows and documentation. And
Mhm.
he's starting doing the old workflow. Was not really exactly what we want, but was close enough. Imagine that it was really a good best draft, a good first draft. That was really now just adjust this step, and then we just starting building on that. And then, of course, this really make the work very easy. So we add like 17 workflows to migrate. What is the difference from this migration to the other migration? The other migration, we add like 1 or 2 workflows for all the process. So basically, the issue was to replicate that to reusable workflows to 700 service. In this case, we have only 2 service, 2 repositories, the Android and iOS, but we have multiple workflows to migrate. And then we had to rewrite a lot of stuff. And that was the way that we use AI to basically, at the pace of each day, we migrate a workflow, and then Cloud Code was able to digest some part of the code base. So I had 2 issues. First, parts of the customization that they have in the iOS team was using Fastline that is written in Ruby. I don't know Ruby, so I used him to understand what was what was the logic behind that Ruby scripts, and add extra features. Then I'm not very well versatile in the iOS test and compile. So I'm not iOS developer. I don't know all the quirks about the process to compile iOS app. And I use Cloud for that. So basically, was already in a way that I had the issue in my pipeline, and I tell, okay, I basically prompts like this. I have a issue in my pipeline. This is the idea of the workflow. This is the idea of job. This is the step it's failing. Fetch using GitHub CLI in that time. Even we using MCP, probably it's best if you have a CLI to tell the AI model to use that CLI to fetch the information instead of uh, load the context with AMCPs. Use the CLI, fetch the logs in that section, and let's go investigate what it's failing. And we were really able. At some point, I get surprised because when I go in deep mode of troubleshooting, the model, in this case, even the agent that is called Cloud Code, was able to go to the internet and find GitHub issues about the problem, pointing out I have found this issue. Probably it's about this. Let's double check. And then I double check. Yeah, probably makes sense. Let's try this change. And it was really, basically, it was a more family language, or I cannot, what I can say. It was like while we're in the past doing Googling. So you put the problem, you try to find the issues. Here, I have the problem, also find the issues in the internet and get me back the information and then validate with me and then explore. And basically, after 4 weeks, we migrate everything. We even add extra features they want, and they were very happy. And still, they are very happy. And then, of course, the initial costs failed because it was more than what I expected, but for one reason, the developers were delivering more. So it was really a situation that the workflows and run are so stable, they can focus more in feature and then increase the cost, but it's because they are shipping more features that they did in the past.
That's a good
And
cost problem to have, you know?
but yeah, yeah. I think that's the thing I have. Do you have any questions about that topic?
Um, I did want to ask, wrapping up, like if someone that's listening, they wanted to pull off like a big CI/CD switch like you did, are there some lessons learned that you could give that they could follow so they don't set their org on fire? I mean, because this is a complex lift and shift, right? Going from Jenkins to GitOps and introducing Argo and all the complexities around, the Mac Mini pipelines. Like, be interested. There's some like core lessons learned that you could impart.
So the first thing is that I think you need to even you have a big pipeline. I bet that you have a small part, so a niche. So try to find a small part that you can replace and do it in isolation. In my case, was basically the pull request validation. It's it's detached in somehow of the big flow. Try on that. If you cannot do it that, try to find segmentations that you have in your organization in terms of teams. That's a good a way to approach. So um, that you can move parts of your team. Or basically, if you have 10 teams or of 5 teams, pick one team and try to go in that way. So this is a way that you can try to reduce the blaster radius. And of course, I think that was a thing that was very important for us. It's basically doing dog food. I
Yeah.
think it's very unfair for someone that is developing tools for developers not using that in their daily work. So I think this is really the most important thing. It's doing dog fooding, and then if you want, try to find in each place. If you
Mhm.
don't have anything, think: do you have internal tooling that
Yeah.
doesn't provide for your final customers? That can be bad. Go to for trying to apply this to your internal tooling.
Yeah. That makes sense. Cool. Where can people find your posts and where can they reach out to you?
Okay, so my posts are in Medium. Probably you can find them, have the links in the description. Also, I have that blog post was based in the talk that I did.
Mhm.
So also in YouTube, I will have that talk. Also, sometimes I do some publishing in LinkedIn. So you can go there, try to reach me in LinkedIn.
Awesome. I'll leave the links for your Medium posts and your LinkedIn and anything else in the show notes. Stephane, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That's my conversation with Stephane Moser. My biggest takeaway from this one is that good CI CD is not just about picking a newer tool. It is about building a delivery system that is predictable, observable, isolated, and usable enough that engineers can trust it without needing constant help from platform teams. That is really the thread running through this whole episode. They did not just swap Jenkins for GitHub Actions. They reduced noisy neighbor problems. They standardized runners. They leaned into reusable workflows. They moved deployment towards GitOps. They built their own visibility layer when the platform was not giving them enough. And they rolled it out in a way that let teams build confidence instead of forcing a giant overnight cutover. I also liked that he was honest about what happens when the new system works. Once deploys get easier, people use them more. Bots start shipping changes. Automation starts piling up. And then you discover the next bottleneck, whether that is queuing, fairness, or protecting enough room for humans to still get work out. That is the real platform lesson. Success creates new load, and the better your self-service story gets, the more you have to think about throughput, guardrails, and the system behavior under trust. The other part I liked was his migration advice at the end. Start with a niche. Reduce blast radius. Dog food your own system first. And if you are building tools for developers, use them yourself first before asking everyone else to bet on them. That is probably the cleanest takeaway from the whole episode. If you enjoyed this episode, follow Ship It Weekly wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want the show notes, links to Stephane, his write-ups, and the resources we talked about, head over to shipitweekly.fm. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you later this week.